exercise when if I quickly sign up, and then it goes to small. This is a Google, and then I looked, and then I took their snippets, and I tried what does it do, and I commented something out, or I changed the numbers, and I was like, what does it do, what does it do, what does it do? Pretty much that. Really liked working with it. She had more than I did.
Good afternoon. How is everyone doing? So today we're going to talk about CSS, cascading style sheets, and we had a little bit of introduction to the topic. Who remembers what we did with CSS in a previous class? What did we style so far in our class?
Backgrounds.
Okay, anything else? Tables, that's the one I was thinking about. So we have some exposure, but now we're going to get a better understanding of the entire process of using CSS and do a lot more examples. And at the end of the class, we have 7 minutes left from this video. I added our time here that is left, 7 minutes to finish the Jeffrey Zeldman video. And we'll do this after the break, perhaps. It seems like you like the video.
Yes.
All right, interesting. All right. So let's get started. The first thing I'd like to say is, so we have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and we have been covering HTML so far in our class. So for what part of web design and development is HTML responsible? What do we use HTML for, Mike?
Structure.
Okay, so the structure. And now we're going to talk about CSS, and we're going to use CSS for the purpose of what?
Styling.
Style or presentation. And when we have HTML and CSS, what we have here is we have static websites. So these are websites that are not going to really allow us to interact with the user in any dynamic way. So those are static websites, web pages. And then those of you next quarter who are taking JavaScript, we're going to add JavaScript to our understanding and make our pages dynamic. So JavaScript is going to be responsible for making the pages dynamic and interactive. And now we're going to zoom into CSS. So before we talk about it, let's just do one example with CSS to warm up, to see it in action, and then I'll show you some slides and talk about the concepts behind it. Please go ahead and start your brackets. And I am recording the lecture, so you can reference it later on YouTube if you need to. Oops. Well,
Try right click open. Yeah, or brackets, I guess.
too many of them. All right, so
Launching it from the all apps.
I might not be able to use brackets today. Okay, so no brackets for me, but hopefully brackets for you. I guess I will work with Notepad++, or Notepad would work fine as well, or Dreamweaver. need to put in a ticket about brackets not working. So go ahead and save your file, the file you'll be working with, save it on the desktop because it seems like that generally works fine. It seems like the S drive still doesn't work sometimes, access not available. And you can title this file first css.html if you like. And let's construct a simple site, and we're going to use some placeholder text to fill the paragraphs. Can you see the size okay in the back, or too small? It's fine? Okay. I might be able to magnify further if necessary. So we're going to give a title to this page, Intro to CSS. And what does CSS stand for? Does anyone know? Okay. And we are going to add our link to the style sheet in the head. That's where the link has to go, but we'll come back and do this after we create our HTML. So for now, the head only has the title, and now the body. And if you have brackets, it's going to close the tags for you, which is helpful, but I don't. How many of you are using brackets? Is it working for everyone else except for me? Okay, that's good. All right, so we're going to have an H1, a P, a paragraph, an H2, and another paragraph, and go ahead and select some sample text from, you have several choices. You have lorem ipsum, kitten ipsum, hipster ipsum, if you like, and fill out your paragraphs. So I need to get out of Magnify for a moment. So I'm going to use kitten ipsum. So here is the code. This is what it's going to look like without CSS. now do we have text? So let's see paragraph. It's a very long paragraph. Normally you want to separate paragraphs into shorter chunks, but probably just put some down to the paragraph. Okay, are we ready for the next step? Yes? Zip, what did you get this populated? All right, so if we take a look now at the page, this is what it looks like, and this is the HTML only, there is no CSS here. Now we're going to create a file containing the CSS, and there is more than one way we can do this. We can actually embed the CSS on the same page as the HTML, and this is what we have been doing so far, but it is preferable to put the CSS in a separate file and then link that file inside the HTML. So for the first time, we're going to create a separate CSS file for the CSS lines of code. So go ahead and say File New. And save as. You can save it as example.css. And normally the CSS is going to go in its own folder, but for now we can just put it in the same folder as the HTML file, and this will be the way we do it. So what you want to make sure is that you save your CSS file in the same folder as the HTML file we just created, right? Okay, and let's add some CSS to this file we just created. So the way that CSS works, as we learned, is that we are going to select different elements on the page and then style those elements with property and the value of the property. And we have to use the curly braces to indicate the scope of each selector. So the first one we're going to apply will be to the body element, the body tag, and we're going to set the font family to Arial, Verdana, and sans serif. And you have to remember to use the semicolons to end your statements. Now, do you remember me telling you last time if we didn't have any CSS before, so where is the styling coming from on our default page?
Browser.
It's going to come from the browser. Essentially, we're going to override the browser default style with our own custom style. And also with the font, some browsers don't support all fonts, so it's a good practice to specify more than one font. So if the first font was not found, then the page can default to the second one and display it and so on. So this is why, in this case, we're showing 3 different fonts, so that if the first or the second one are not there, then the third one hopefully will be there. And if for some reason none of them are there, it's going to default back to the browser font, the default font. And this is should not be a problem, but I'm just explaining to you why we're doing it like that. So this is the body, and we expect now the entire body to contain fonts of Arial type when we look at it. The next one we're going to select is the H1. So we have an H1 and H2. And we can select both of them in one state, and to do so, we have to separate it with a comma. So H1 and H2, and then again the curly braces. And let's go ahead and set the color for these elements, and we can set it, for example, to red. And again, don't forget the semicolons. We can also apply a style to the paragraphs. And so let's make the color on the paragraphs blue. And remember that if we select an element by the tag name, that means that all of the elements of the page with this tag name will be selected. And I also showed you if we wanted to only select one paragraph. Does anyone remember? We'll go over it again, but what did we do if we want to only select one?
Use the index or ID.
We're going to use the ID. We have to give it an ID, and then we're going to use the ID from CSS to select it. Well, let's save our CSS file. So can we now expect to see the style applied? Not yet. We have to do more work. It's there, but we're not actually linking to that file from the HTML. So let's go back to the HTML. And to link CSS, you have to do this in the head of the document. So under the title, we're going to add a link tag. And then in the href attribute, we're going to say example.css. And we're going to say type equals text CSS. And the rel tag, the relationship is going to be style sheet. Okay, so save. And let's try this out. And sure enough, there you go. Now we have the different heading, the two headings. We made both of them the same color, and that's what we're seeing here. We have a different font, and we have our paragraphs colored accordingly. Okay. Any questions?
Can you zoom in on the
Sure, yeah. All right, so let's see. Here is the code, so take a minute, make sure that everyone has this working. And if you want to challenge yourself, give an ID to one of the paragraphs and see if you remember how to make one of the paragraphs green. Do you have any questions? So if you're saving a CSS file, you have to have a CSS extension. You save it with HTML. So you need to change it, say as example.css. So when we have, maybe it didn't make it clear, but when we're working with CSS files, they have a different extension, right? And that extension will be .css. So try again. And make sure that the name, when you link to the file, make sure that the file name is spelled correctly. That's another problem that happens. If it doesn't work, double check immediately to make sure that you spell the name correctly. And then when we start putting our files in organized folders, you have to make sure that you can follow the proper directory structure. Otherwise, your code will break.
The CSS be in the subfolder then?
Yes, normally what we would do is, and maybe I should have done this now, we're going to have the root folder, as I showed you before though. I showed you this before. We have our project folder, and in here we have a folder called CSS or styles. Actually, styles, I would say. And we also have a folder for our images. And eventually we're going to add a folder for the JS. And this is a structure that's recursive, so if you have subfolders, you can repeat the same structure in subfolders. And that's how, if you have an index HTML here, You can have more than one index HTML on the page, but they will be in subfolders.
What's the third one?
I put a JS here for scripts.
Yes.
Okay, anyone having any issues before we move on? So you can just refresh. Can you bring it to Is it the right version? So you can make this capitalized. So you have to be very careful with the, when you type in CSS, we have, CSS is case sensitive. So if you're not following the syntax properly, it will not work, it will break. And for example, here with the font name, you need to give those uppercase and they are separated by commas, right? And right now we just have a couple lines, so it's not a problem to just visually try to find the error. But when you start getting more, longer chunks of code, then you want to use the validator so you can point to the line where the error is. So I'm working.
So it's actually when something works. Yeah, I have to look up there, but I didn't use the content. Some are direct.
Right now, but if not, I would recommend you just run it to the validator so you can catch the errors. Maybe not that. So you have to be careful with the typing errors. Okay, so let's look at a few slides and then we'll do another example. So I think it's very helpful to think, when you think about CSS, just consider that every element is in its own box. So you can just visualize your elements as in a box, and then you apply the style to those boxes. Here we have an example where we have created borders around the boxes so it's easier to see, but that doesn't have to be the case. Even if we don't visually show the boxes, the borders around the boxes, if you have a block level element or an inline element, they're always going to reside in their own box. And then you can think about applying CSS to those boxes. Does this make sense? Right. So if this is an inline element here, what are the chances that, can you think of some possible tags that might describe this in HTML? Span, yeah. I think a span, this looks like it's italicized, but a span is always a good choice for just selecting a text within an entire paragraph. And otherwise, these are the block level elements, so they're going to take up entire lines rather than just a part of the line. All right, so let's now review what we did and give names to what we did. So when we have CSS, the way this works is that we're going to associate style rules with HTML elements. So here we're associating the style rule for a font family with HTML element, in this case paragraph. And what we're going to call this P element from now on is the selector. So this is the selector, and then the name value pair of the font family and Arial is going to be referred to as a declaration, right? Within the declaration, we have a property. So the properties are going to be the different properties you can apply to your elements. And the value, I can't think of a better word. Then each property is going to have a specific value for your particular element, right? So these are the new terms to start using from now on to refer to how we manipulate HTML with CSS. So selectors, and then we have the property value within the declaration. And all the syntax, again, if you miss any of these syntax details, your CSS will not work, because we have seen a couple examples here. And again, my recommendation is you can try looking through it quickly, but it's also very helpful to just use the CSS validator. I want to point out again that the HTML validation has to happen in a different validator. So you're going to Google for HTML5 validator for HTML, and then there is a CSS validator for the CSS. And sometimes you don't know where the problem is, so you may need to try both, right? So if one of them doesn't work, then you just have to keep on working through it until you pinpoint the problem. Okay, so this is our example we did. We used some color names that were red and green, so this is one way that you can describe color. You can also describe color with a hexadecimal hashtag, and this actually gives you a lot more options. The text names such as red, blue, green are only a subset that are easily used. However, I'll show you later how you can use many different colors with a hexadecimal value from the color wheel, and there is actually also a third way to select through the RGB, right? So there are three different ways that you can select the color for your pages. Okay, and now we have learned how to use the external style sheet. So we have to link it. It has to be linked in the head of the document, and you need to make sure if you have subfolders to specify the name of the subfolder. Who remembers if we wanted to put the CSS in the HTML, if we wanted to just embed it, do you remember which tag would we use then? Okay, shall we do this just for practice? Okay, let's just make a change here. Let's see, where is it? So this is just a different way that we can include CSS, and the presentation should not change. So right now we had our link, and we can comment out the link. So if we commented the link, this means that the browser engine will ignore it, right? It's not going to act on it. And instead, we're going to add a style tag. And then we put our CSS in the style tag. So let's try running this code and see what happens. We should see no difference. Okay. Any questions? So what happens is when the browser sees the style tag, there's going to be a sign for the browser, oh, I'm no longer using HTML, and it's going to switch so that it now starts reading CSS. And then when you close the tag, it's going to know, okay, now I'm back out of the CSS, and then I start interpreting or reading the HTML again. It will be the same with JavaScript. When we add this script tags, the browser is going to know to switch out of HTML into JavaScript and so on, and PHP is the same way. So this is the idea. The style tag is going to tell the browser to use to interpret this differently than HTML. If you wanted to add a comment inside the style sheet, whether it's on this page or it's on a separate page, you can't use the HTML style comments. They will not work because that's a different language. So then what you need to do is you're going to use /*. And this is how you comment out in CSS, and hopefully in brackets, the color changes as well for you so you can see the difference. You can uncomment it for now, but just wanted to point out that it's a different style of commenting compared to HTML. Okay. So remember I told you there was yet another way that you can represent the color besides the hashtag, which is a hexadecimal. You can also present it as a RGB. And so the RGB is going to take 3 arguments, and maybe now I'll just show you a color wheel so you can see where this comes from.
Excuse me, which one is hexadecimal?
Oh, so the hexadecimal would be the one that starts with a hashtag. A hexadecimal is a number system. So we normally use the decimal system, which is 0 through 9. Hexadecimal is a larger number system that also includes 0 through 9 and then A, B, C, D, E, and F. So it allows for more values to be represented. And that's what we happen to use for colors. So let's take a look at the color wheel. We're actually going to have a lecture on color, but just to show you real quick a color wheel. So here is a color wheel. I just used the first one that came up. And when you select a certain value, then you're going to be able to, this is where you can get the hexadecimal or the RGB representation. So don't worry about it too much right now. We'll come back for it, but this is what those numbers mean in the example here. Now, so far we have been selecting with the name of the tag or the element, and when we do this, all the elements on the page with this tag are going to be selected, right? But there are also other ways we may need or want to select elements. It's not just, we don't necessarily always want all paragraphs to be read, so they may be need to do something different. And so CSS allows for different types of selectors in addition to just by tag name. You can have a universal selector represented by the asterisk, which is going to select, if you needed to select everything on the page, this would be the selector to use. You can select by type, and we have learned that you can have one type or you can have multiple types, and they have to be separated by a comma, right? Then you can select by a class name. If you have a class name, you can represent this in one of 2 ways, but always has the dot. So the dot means this is a class. You can say the name of the paragraph or the element to which the class belongs, or just the name of the class, right? And that means that we always have to give in order to be able to apply a class selector, it means we have given a class attribute in HTML. right? And we'll do some examples of that. So we have the class. So who remembers, or maybe I should ask, who knows, what are the scenarios where we might want to use a class as opposed to an element? When would you select the class?
Parts of something that has the same elements.
To pick only parts of something that has the same elements, right? Let's say we want to apply the node class to 3 out of the 5 paragraphs on the page. We want 3 paragraphs to be a node and maybe change them to italicized. And so we would say for those paragraphs class equals node, and then in the CSS apply a certain property environment, right? And then the ID, again with ID you have to give a ID attribute in your HTML. It's always in pairs, and always make sure that you have the correct name, right? So the typos are very common. Make sure if you exactly including the casing how you spell the ID in the HTML that you also spell it the same in the CSS, right? And to represent the ID in the CSS, we're going to use the # or hashtag, however you want to call it. But there is more. You can also get more sophisticated with your selectors and work with child, descendant, sibling, and general sibling. And to understand what this means, we actually need to talk about something we haven't talked yet, which is the DOM, the document object model. Has anyone heard of the DOM before? Okay. So every page, when it's created in the browser, we call it a document, the browser is going to generate something called the document object model to represent it. And it is exactly the same content, except it's a different view. The reason we want to use the document object model representation is because it allows us to describe hierarchical relationships, such as parent-child relationships. And then we can start talking that a certain paragraph is a child of a certain HTML tag and so on. So let me show you, and I don't really think we should go too much into it, but I'll show you just a sample DOM representation of a page. And this would help you, I think, understand those selectors here. See. All right, so here is a pretty simple one. And so what we're going to do is look at this, and I just picked it sort of at random. It's simple enough. And then we're going to see how this relates to a page. So as you can see, all pages have a document. We are going to, all pages are documents. And then we have always a root element on each page, such as HTML. So we're always going to have HTML, and now every page also always is going to have a head and a body, right? We have to have that. And so if you look at it this way, instead of on a HTML page, we can see, oh, the head and the body are children of the, which one do you think? Of the root of the HTML. And also we can say, oh, if they're on the same level, another way we can state this is that the head and the body are siblings. Okay, so this is what this means. And then an ascendant would be not just a child, but for example, the text would be an ascendant development because it's not directly under, but it could be a couple levels under. And so when you're using those other selectors, you need to think in terms of the DOM, otherwise it would not make sense. And maybe we should come back to this in a more advanced lecture, but now hopefully it helps a little to put in perspective those selectors here. Do you have any questions about what I said? All right. So you're clear on what I said? All right. Well, let's go ahead and do another example. how about we do a class selector example? Please go ahead and add one more paragraph, one or two more paragraphs to your page. So let's say that we want the last two paragraphs to be bold or purple. How would we make this happen? I want my last two paragraphs to be purple. Give them an ID. Who said that? Who said that? You? Okay. Well, if we give them an ID, then will it work? Because I want the requirement is we want two of them to be. So ID only works on one. So what other tool do we have to give it to? Let's try class. So we're going to learn when to use what, but in this case, if we want more than one, we're going to apply a class. So let's go ahead and add a class. And the class is an attribute, so it's going to go inside the opening tag. We're going to give it the class of colored, and also to the very last one. And we have been mostly working with color just because it's easy to see, but you can apply any kind of style change in this process, and I hope this is clear. Okay, so are we ready, or is there something else we need to do?
Good to go to the CSS.
We have to go to the CSS. And then how do we select the class? Dot colored. Okay, so say purple. Okay, and sure enough, and here is the code. All right, let's go ahead and set the background color for our page to a different color. So if we do this, again, we're going to select the body tag, and then we're going to use background.
A question?
Yeah.
Does the class color red, does that override the color of the P tag?
Yes, so if it will, because it's more specific. So one of the rules, and there are several different rules to consider, but one of the rules in CSS is that a more specific style is going to override a less specific one. So that was a good question, and I'll talk more about it in a bit. So for now, let's see if we can set up the background color to, let's say, light blue. Sure enough. What if I wanted to make the box of one of my H1 or H2 a different color? Say I want to make it yellow. How would I do that? Let's say I want the H2 to have a yellow background.
Then you'd have to
It is the
convert the
background color in that one.
Okay, so can you tell me what we need to add then?
You will add the H1 or H2 and you can just
Okay.
add more lines there.
So we can add an H2.
With this background color.
And sure enough, here it is. Okay, so I'm also going to add another selector here, another property, so I can show you. So how about text align? And again, it can be any of those, and we can align it to center.
One of the options it gives on the text align is inherit. What does that do?
Inherit is going to inherit the style from an element that is higher up in the hierarchy. It's a more advanced thing, but that's what it means. It will inherit it from somewhere else that was already defined.
So if it's defined in the body, say.
For example, it will inherit it. That's
Yeah.
right. Question?
Could you scroll down the text really quick to the paragraphs that you do class?
Yes, here it is. Did we try an ID today? So I don't think. Did you? Did you get it to work?
Yeah.
So no need to do the ID again?
He didn't work for me.
It didn't work for you. Which one was that?
It was an ID.
Okay, let's take it.
It was an ID. Right there.
Right. So the reason is because the syntax would be, it's not, the ID is not a tag, P is the tag.
ID is not a tag.
ID is the attribute.
You know, we're doing CSS.
So try it now. Are we good here, or do we need a little more time? We good? All right.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So CSS rules do cascade, and I would like us to do an example of how they cascade. So we're going to do a new example, and the purpose of this next example will be to demonstrate the cascading effect of the different rules, right?
You wanted your font size.
So for this example, we have already a lot going on here with these colors. So how about we start a new page? And we'll just add a few elements to it. And you can save as, so let me start this with you. Close all. We'll start a new file. Save as cascade.html. I should mention something else about CSS at this point, which is that CSS has different versions and different browsers actually have different support for CSS. For the work we're doing right now, this should not be an issue. But when you get to some more advanced functions and use, in particular, CSS version 3, you might find that the CSS does not work the same across all browsers. And then you can research, what is the support for different browsers. But you should be aware that there are different versions, and if you're using CSS 3 features, they may not be supported uniformly across all browsers. Okay, so let's create a quick page here for our next example. And then after this, we'll take our break. Okay. So this will be CSS rules cascade. That's the title of the document. So, for example, here, the HTML is the parent. I just want to go back to the document model since we have a few lines of HTML. The HTML is the parent of the head, and the head is the parent of the title, right? And also, if you want to look at it the other way, the title is the child of the head, right?
What did we save this as?
I'm sorry?
What did we save this one as?
I saved it as cascade.html. So the example will be about cascading, the effects of cascading style sheets. All right. So before we add our style, let's add a couple paragraphs in the body to work with. And H1, this is an H1. And a paragraph. And a second paragraph, and that's all we need. And then close the body. Okay, let's take a look at this page as is. Okay. So let's start adding style sheets and then observing the changes. We're just going to add them in the style tag. Who remembers what the asterisk selector does? Everything. Font family, Arial, comma, Verdana, sans serif. Okay. So I don't know if you saw, but the font did change. Are you still working on making the pages? Are we ready to continue? Or? Let's go ahead and apply. Thank you, Chris. Let's go ahead and apply an H1 selector here. And then we're going to change font family to, so for the H1, Courier New. And why it is in quotation mark, you might be wondering. Any thoughts?
Is that your main one?
Because?
It's the name of that one.
Because it's two words. Because it's two words, and we have to put it in quotation marks so that it knows that it's, it's one entity. All right, and then semicolon. So this was the H1, and let's refresh and see if we see any changes. And sure enough, even though we said all elements should have area of Verdana, if we put the H1 under, it's going to override the above style selector, and now the H1 is more specific. So the rule is that more specific will override less specific, right? Are we okay? All right. And then, let's see here. Sorry, so I wanted to add a couple of inline tags in the HTML, so let's go back here. So let's make a couple of your words, whichever one they are, italicized. So you have different tags than me probably. And then I'll make another couple words bold. It's hard to see here. I didn't do it. Oh, here we go. So we have italicized and bold. And this was from within the HTML, but we're going to style those. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to select the I tag, which is the italicized, and then apply color green. And then let's select, okay, now let's test. Oh, I didn't save it probably, so let's see. All right, so now the color is green, and I'll show you just one more thing and then we'll take a break. So do you see how the color is green now when we say color green? Well, what if we now say under color green? The same tag, select the same selector, but color red. And as you can see here, it illustrates again that the following CSS is going to override the previous one. Then it's not more specific, but it's slower further down on the cascade hierarchy, if you will. Let's take a 10 minutes, and then we have a few more things to work with. Right? At 3 p.m. today, there is a Byte Club meeting. Any of you interested? In 3176. Yeah, me too. Also there.
I'm still not getting anything to show up on it.
Let me see. Can I see your result, your page? Do you save it as HTML? You do. You don't have to inspect around on him. No. So first of all, I want you to enable file extensions, and then this way we know that it is an HTML file. This was the first thing I was running. Let me try it in Chrome. You have nothing showing, something is nothing showing. Are you sure that's the right file?
Not sure what.
Is the right file? Is the right file?
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Here's a problem. You have to have columns. You have to be careful with the syntax. Right? Okay, so let's try it. Let's try it again. There may be other issues, but certainly this one. Yeah.
So, I don't know why this stupid scroll bar won't go away. It's only in Chrome, but on Firefox is fine. And it messes with my pages. At least it was.
Scroll bar.
Yeah, because I'm getting this little gap here, which is not on the other side. And it's only the
Nope,
and I don't want to
still
get rid of it. And it's because of the scroll bar, so I don't know if there's something my CSS that is causing it, but I can't figure out what.
Browser specific.
I know. Like, I did check Firefox just to see if it was browser specific.
Yeah, Firefox doesn't have this. So this is the issue with this. Is it the res? Is it? Yeah. This is 100. Does this change it now? Does it?
Let's look at Firefox. Oh, well, yeah, that's a little-
It's probably not zero.
Okay. Oh, I swear I thought about the image earlier. So what did I change the? Yeah.
I don't think this was before.
Well, because I commented out, I was Googling it and it said maybe overflow was the issue, so I commented out.
Oh, if you get
overflow.
overflow, very good, yeah.
But I commented it all out, it's still,
I would have to look at your property in more detail.
Yeah.
So, what,
Yeah, commented it out.
okay.
So I think it's this. Because it's extending too far and it, yeah. I don't know why it's doing that.
You have class content, so I guess you're telling me that. I guess you have to look at the styles of what
Yeah.
you do. Alright, almost time to resume.
The only thing in it is like 100% as far as I can tell, the background color.
That is true, yeah, but 100% should not.
I don't know.
That's CSS for you. It's just really not. It doesn't necessarily work as you think it
Well,
does.
because regards to other things can also break it.
Yes, that's right. There's a funny GIF. Let's see if I can show it to you guys about CSS. Let's see. Oh, perfect. All right, so let me show you some humor real quick. All right, so right now what we're doing with CSS is pretty straightforward, but things can get pretty challenging. And anyway, take a look.
Yep, that's about right.
It's like that checkbox yesterday, but with the only the center.
There you go. So you can expect some challenges of this nature with CSS, and you just have to, play with it until you figure it out. It's not intuitive. It's not necessarily top down to just be able to follow what's going on. But I mean, it works. All right.
Or you rip it off the wall.
Or you rip it off the wall. Yes, Morgan.
Just really quick because
Okay, I need to start the class, but I can take a quick,
yeah,
very quick look. Here we go. Or maybe,
now like my entire body, it looks like that.
so you just now is center.
Yeah, but how is it this is here? It's here with the body is all the way over like that. That makes no logic.
I'll
So
get to
that'll,
look
like, that'll
to this. I'm
explain
sorry,
that.
I'll get to look to your CSS
Okay.
to answer this. It could be number things, but I mean, it's good you're playing with it. I think it's time for us to resume our little example here with the inheritance, or rather, not so much inheritance, but the CSS cascading effect. All right, so we added the color green and then red, and we saw that, Christina, you missed our GIF. I'll play it again.
Oh, fantastic.
All right.
That's funny.
Let's see. Okay, what was I doing? Yes, here we go. So this is where we are. We established that writing the second style for I overrides the first one because it's lower on the CSS list. Now let's go ahead and add. We have a couple of bold elements, so let's make those B, and let's make them pink. Or actually, we only have one, but let's make it pink. My machine is thinking. All right, something broke. All right, here we go. So now the bold paragraph is pink. What if we say the bold paragraph, the bold within the paragraph, and then color blue? And we're going to add the important. I think that my machine is not saving properly. So the important should essentially say ignore any other rules. This one is the important one. Is it changing for you guys? It's just me. Okay.
How does it, can you show the? Do you need the colon after the color?
Oh yeah, a semicolon. Actually, technically, if you only have one, you shouldn't have to, but
I typed it on the
yeah, I didn't want to say that. So if you actually have only one line of CSS, you don't have to technically put a semicolon on the last one, but just put it.
So does that say paragraph and bold, color?
All right, color. Oh, because I forgot. I don't know about you guys, but I forgot the column here. There you go. Okay, here we go. So what happened is I'll magnify it so you can see this better. But this was my typo here. I did not have I forgot the column. Okay. Did everyone get this to work now that we added the column? So you have an exclamation mark, important, and this is how you specify this is important and ignore any other subsequent styling. Let's see if I can work. It's working for some reason.
Well, yeah, I wasn't sure. So this means that
The bold within the paragraph.
the bold within the paragraph
So it's fine.
should change to this one, right?
Yes.
Oh,
There is. There is.
yeah, but it was blue. Oh, yeah, I suppose before it was highly red. So
No,
it
it's
changed
blue.
to
This
this.
is the logo. It will-
And the important means that, I'm sorry, you said it. What's that?
So it means that we're going to ignore any subsequent styling, but we're going to not be able to see it in action.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm gonna keep reading.
We get the bold in the paragraph, and if I just said B, this would still work, right? This sometimes you specify the parenting element as well. So let's see if we now say, if we add here P, B, and then make the color violet. Will it change? It should not change if you had the important above it. It will only change if you don't have it. Okay. And then we have a couple other items to add.
changed even though I had it important.
Then something is not,
Yeah.
okay. It should not. Alright. Anyone else? Issues? Did it change? Yes.
I just had a question of why is that last line all together, whereas previous
Okay.
lines are...
That's a good question, and thank you for bringing it up. I should have talked about this. All right, so do you see how I've been using this style and now I use this style? Well, CSS ignores white space, so it doesn't care. It's going to work either way. It's a matter of preference how you want to organize your code. Normally, if you have more than one statement, it's better to use it in separate with the opening and closing tags as such. If we just have one, sometimes just is a shortcut to just put it inside. But I was doing the other way just because to be more clear, perhaps, right? But you can use either syntax, except if you have more than one, you should try to use them on separate lines so that they're clearly visible. Geneva?
Say that you're in a portfolio and the company that's interested in your work wants to see your CSS sheet to see how you do your style. And will they decide against hiring you if they see that you style your CSS sheets a different way than they do, like in a different format?
Well, there are some, that's a good question. There are some best practices that if you don't follow, they might get picky about and how the files are organized. So yeah, there is something to that, to what you said. I think we don't know enough right now to really answer more meaningfully, but yes, if a company looks at your portfolio, looks at your code, and they're not satisfied with, even if it works, how the code is organized, this could be a problem. Right? On the other hand, it's a lot of the times it's also a matter of preference. So some companies will have a preference how to do it, but it doesn't mean that that's the right way, right? And in fact, the thing with the curly braces is an example of that. Maybe somebody is said for sure it has to be on the same line if it's only one, and I think that's right. But the other funny example is with the tabs versus spaces. Has anyone of you watched Silicon Valley show?
Yeah.
Okay, so did you see the episode with the tabs versus spaces? And so yeah, so the guy, like the main character, was dating a girl, and essentially they broke up because he wanted to use spaces and she wanted to use tabs. So the idea being is that these people get pretty, passionate about coding syntax. Let's add a couple more items here for our page. Let's add an ID of intro to our first paragraph. So ID equals intro. And then let's style our intro ID. I guess I'll just be consistent here since you brought this up. Yeah, so it's really not necessary to do this, but I was doing it, so I'll keep on doing it. If you just had one, you might as well just put it inside. So let's make our font size 100%. And now let me magnify so you can see better. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add a paragraph selector here. Font size 75%. And as you can see, we now have 75%. So this is a relative unit of measure. And when we talk about responsive programming, responsive web design, this will be very helpful. The percentage is not a set pixel size, but it's relative. And that's how you want to work when you're doing responsive design. More on this soon. So hopefully this gave you a sense about the effects of the style sheets. And then I'd like us to, we have a little time. Let's do one more example.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
Doesn't ID only affect paragraph that ID is appended to?
Correct.
So why in the style should we write instead of pound intro, but p pound intro? Isn't that redundant?
Yes, so if you just used hashtag intro, it would work as well.
Yeah, because
Sometimes people like to use the element it belongs to so that it's more clear, because it can get confusing very fast. But if you took it out, it would work the same as well. Okay, I think we have time for one more example, and I think we have about 10 minutes left for our film. So let's see if we can work here with what we have. I think we can. Let's see. Okay, let's add a body. And then make the border, so the border property, and we're going to make it 2 pixels, solid, and how about blue? And we'll add a padding of 20 pixels. And we haven't talked about padding yet, but I'll show you the box. For now, just use it, and when we talk about the CSS box model, I will show you more about padding margin and so on. Didn't take, let's see here. Go ahead and add an H1, an H2, and a P. Here's what I would like us to do. Go ahead and let's remove our previous examples. So, no, here's what we'll do. Please go ahead and save as box.html. So we can use the HTML, but we need to delete some of these cascading style sheets from here. So save the same file we were working with as box.html, and then let's delete pretty much everything inside the CSS. So now we have a H1, we don't have an H2, so let's add an H2 here real quick. This is an H2. And let's give them border. And it's good to indent, as I'm sure you have been doing this, but make sure to indent 2 pixels, solid green. Padding 10 pixels. Okay. So that's the whole page. I need to close this down. All right. So those boxes are there whether or not we visually represent them, right? But it just helps to see them visually as well. And that's what we're doing here. Although, why is the body not taking? Do we have a typo there, anyone?
Yeah, the 2 is missing the P.
Oh, thank you. There you go. Oh, there you go. This will definitely do it. Thank you. That's not it either. There you go. Pixels. And now we have our body as well. And we have a italicized. We have something italicized here. Yes, we do. So let's go ahead and add I. Border. 2 pixels, solid purple. Padding 5 pixels. All right, and here are the boxes. So let's make sure you have this working. This is what you're going for, and I will now magnify again so you can see the code. So the padding is going to add some space between the text and the border. This is what the padding does. Right? And again, we'll talk more about it, but I can show you real quick here. For example, the H1 has padding of 10, and so we have this padding between the text and the border of the element. And if I made this 20, padding 20, then save, and then we should expect to see increased padding. So this is what the padding does. And again, we'll talk more about it when we talk about the CSS box model, which is a pretty important concept. All right, is this working for you guys? Okay.
Why do you need to say solid at these?
You don't need to say
I left
solid.
it out and it didn't show.
Right, so you don't have to say solid, but you have to tell what kind of border you want. So you can, there are other ones you can do as well. So you can say, if you don't want solid, then you can do dotted, right? So dotted, so here is dot, D-O-T-T. So 3 or 4. Let's see. Border styles. You should just, if you're in brackets, you should get a drop-down menu to let you select from the different styles. You can have dashed, dotted, you can have groove, so let's try the groove. Groovy. Groove. Okay. And there's some other ones to reach and inset. So where did the magnify go? So let's make the eye inset. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show you for today. And I think now I'm going to show the last, what is it, 7-10 minutes of the video. And then we'll have a few minutes for you to wrap up what you're doing if you like. So let me turn off the recording.
What was the last thing you just added?
I made the italicized
Inset?
inset.
Yes. Radius. This one has my radius. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That's